I don't even know how to do this. I haven't been
That's what's so great.
All right, well, let's get into it. So welcome everybody. We hope you enjoyed last week's episode. If you haven't checked it out yet, certainly go subscribe to the Dark Side of Therapy. Eric and I had, I think, a great conversation about trauma-focused cognitive behavioral therapy. We talked about some of the good sides, which there weren't many, and then also, just the statistics and the things behind it, and then we encourage people to really give us feedback, because we want to answer your questions, and that's exactly what we're going to do tonight. We're going to answer some questions that we have found on social media, some of the common questions, and we're going to sort of get each other's feedback. Before we get into that, I'm newer to the show. I'm very grateful that Eric has allowed me to be a co-host with him and really dive into this and hopefully make a good show for everybody. So I'm Justin. I'm a licensed professional clinical counselor. I can say that officially because I finished up my hours.
Congratulations.
Yeah, thank you. Although the board hasn't necessarily given me my official thing yet, they did cash my check, so I'll call that as good. And then of course my awesome co-host Eric Nance.
Yeah, it was such a good time doing the show, and like I told you, I got really good feedback that this is the direction we want to take it, and that's exactly what I wanted to hear. And I think seeing my original vision come true now, it's just like I said, I was so excited to do this tonight, to jump off what we did last time, that I barely slept for like 2 days. So clearly, I'm pretty pumped up about this. But yeah, it was an amazing experience last time. I know that we're going to give the audience something they've never had before in a mental health podcast, because we're friends, but we're not afraid to irritate each other, and it's going to happen. Maybe not tonight, and maybe, but I like the freedom that we both bring to the show. So thank you for being that guy.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you for having me. And
Absolutely.
if you're always comfortable, you're not growing, right? So I think both of us can grow in
Correct.
different ways by this and help our viewers grow, right? And challenge sort of those things that are beaten into their heads. So yeah, I'm all
I,
for it.
to- I, to- I totally agree. So, I mean, this is what's fun about the show. I don't even know how to start this one tonight. Who's going to go first? I mean, we haven't even figured that out.
I think maybe I've sort of got this question. I mean, I know you've been losing sleep over asking these questions, but I think I want to like make you wait just a little bit longer. And so, since that's sort of my thing, like I think I'll just jump in and ask you this question, and then get your thoughts, and then maybe you just sort of open up a
Yeah,
discussion, if you're
let's
cool with that.
let's let's do it.
And so, just for those listening, again, these are questions that we have found from different sources, right? Whether it's Reddit or Facebook or whatever sort of social media platform. But as you know, Eric, people are going to social media. TikTok is a big one, um, for information, right? And
Yeah.
you can get good
Yep.
information, and also I think you can get some pretty crappy information. And so I think today is about taking some of these either common questions or sort of these very interesting questions, and then from two professionals in the field, trying to
Right.
give some really good feedback. Does that sound like what our
Yeah.
agenda is tonight?
I think you nailed it. And also to remember that, I'm much older than you. So let me take you back like 30 years. In mental health was obviously a little bit different back then, but we used to have experts in the field, okay? And to quote Sam Harris, the domain of expertise, right? You have people that just, these are the experts. The world has changed apparently since I was in high school, uh, where we've opened up the forum where anybody can now be an expert. And I think for mental health, that's really dangerous, because mental health is different than science. We know this because everything is observable. Anybody can look at something and say, well, there it is, without having done any of the research, the brain scanning, whatever. And so I think there's a whole new danger that's popping up. But I'm also intrigued by it, right? Because I like the darkness of it. And as I'm looking at my questions, I'm thinking the people that have asked these, are supposed to be clientele. I don't know if they are. I
Yeah.
don't know what their diagnoses are. I don't know what their issues are. I have no idea what their background is. So taking these things with a grain of salt, I think will be a lot of fun. But we have limited information too in terms of how we're going to answer.
Right. Yeah.
Having said that, yeah.
Yeah, so let's jump into it. I mean, it'll be like I was saying a little bit earlier. I think it'll be really interesting to see how we approach these questions, right? As you were saying,
It will be.
and just sort of the difference. But so I'll just sort of jump in. So
Good.
I'm yeah, go ahead.
No, I was going to say I am ready for this.
Oh, perfect. All right. So one of the questions I had, this comes from there have been variations of this question, and so I'm really just interested in your thoughts wherever that may go. But this was from sort of a social media group. It's supposed to be sort of parents supporting parents for kiddos, specifically with sort of sensory processing disorder. So
Okay.
with that context in mind, the question is, uh, my my 5-year-old has sensory processing disorder. We go to therapy, we go to OT. Nothing seems to be working. Nothing seems to be helping. In particular, they can't settle down and they can't sleep. Besides melatonin, what else can I give my kid?
Wow. You know how we talked about 5 minutes ago about doing this and not having been prepared at all and just
Yeah.
doing this. Now I see the value in this because I'm really going to have to think about this. So let me take you back to when I worked with kids. And so I'm a kid therapist, right? And this parent is saying to me, "What else can I do?" The first thing that comes to my mind, Justin, is do you exercise with your child? How much exercise do they get? That's the first thing I would probably ask a parent. And I say that because there is a lot of research that backs that kids don't exercise like they used to. Even in elementary school, we've taken so much of the activity out. And I'm not a childhood expert, so feel free to call me out on this. But if kids don't get the energy out of their system, they're probably going to be wound up a lot of the time because that's what they are. They're little energy forces. But the other thing I would also ask about and probably get slapped in the face is what does the diet look like? Because I think diet in kids is so neglected. Now, I don't know how often you kind of go down that path with parents because it really is one of those tough questions like, what, you're going to tell me I'm not feeding my kid correctly? No, I just want to know what they consume because it can have a huge effect on sleep, on mood, on energy level. So that's how I would start with that question.
Yeah. Yeah, let's talk about those food dyes, right? The red 40s and the yellow 5s and the research on that. Um,
Yeah.
and and how that those dyes contribute to sort of these what is seen as not everything is sensory processing or ADHD, right? So that diet question is a good one. So what do you think, Eric? This thread went on for a while, and the responses were, have you maxed out on melatonin? Melatonin is natural. It's organic. Give it to him. Give him more. Give him up. It's okay. That's what I do for my kid.
Okay. Um, okay. So now I'm feeling fired up. So apparently you're asking the right question. Um, the problem in this question is there's so little background that is given. I mean,
Sure.
I don't know if you agree with me, but I think we at least need to know what other things they've tried and maybe again a bit more about the biology of this kid. It seems like it's a question that's a little too simple. But no, do I think melatonin, jacking a kid up on that's the way to go? No. And I certainly wouldn't put that ahead of things like diet and exercise, looking at those things first. Um, I think the chemical answer is too often the answer people go with. Just give them more of this.
Yeah.
It can be dangerous to give people too much melatonin. It can be dangerous to do that. So when we talked earlier about people playing doctor on here, yeah, I think that's a horrendous piece of advice to give a parent.
Yeah. Not to mention, I don't know that many people know this, but melatonin is an actual hormone. Um,
I feel like I knew that, but say more, please.
Yeah, so there's a couple studies that are out there, but the one that I'm sort of thinking about comes from the National Center for Complementary and Integrative Health, right? So the NCCIH, and so that's not so I'm not just pulling this out of thin air, but it is a hormone, and actually, um, our brain produces it when it senses darkness, right?
Right,
So
right,
why do we feel sleepy on rainy days? Because it's getting darker outside. It's not necessarily the rain. I mean, rain doesn't make us sleepy. It's dark, and our brain goes, "Oh, darkness, sleep time," right? And so our brain actually starts to make this, and this is why good sleep hygiene is so important because our circadian rhythm, our 24-hour clock, and if we're messing with that,
right.
our hormones and things get out of the way. So that's maybe a different conversation, but melatonin is sort of seen as this safe thing, this safe pill, but it's actually a hormone, and we know that hormones do all kinds of things to our bodies,
Right,
right? We
right.
talk about like um, when women are pregnant, right? And their hormones are doing all kinds of things to their body and their mood and their behaviors. Kids going through puberty, right? Uh, their hormones are, but I have not heard people talk about, oh, well, maybe my kid is struggling to fall asleep because I've been giving him melatonin for the past 2 years. Um, so that's sort of my thought on that. I don't know if you have any reactions to that.
Well, you know, to me, it just goes back to how interventions are sold to people because we have this way in
Yeah,
this culture, Justin, of saying, let me tell you all potential benefits, but let me not tell you some of the potential side effects and some of the harmful things because whenever you look at that stuff, it's always underneath the label, right, in very small writing, and nobody reads that stuff. But when you say it's a hormone, that really hits me because I don't think we're supposed to be jacking ourselves up full of hormones, uh, at least not in this context.
right.
I had never thought about it like that, and I know so many parents that do give their kids this stuff in this hope again that it's going to lead to this monumental behavioral change. I wonder how many times that happens. I mean, really, really happens.
And I want to be careful. I don't want to come across as, sort of demonizing parents that use melatonin. I think that, you know, everything in moderation, right? And I understand being a father of young toddlers. There are some days where I just can't, and I need you to go to sleep, and you are not
Sure.
sleeping. So part of it is a selfish thing, right? And so we want our kids to go to sleep. We need a break, like just go to sleep.
Right.
So you
Right.
think about, oh, single moms and single parents in general, or whatever the case may be, right? We're struggling paycheck to paycheck, and this is just another thing. We're trying to help our kids, and so the doctor
Yes.
says try melatonin. So I don't want to demonize it either, or say this is, for the viewers listening, like if you give your kids melatonin, you're a terrible person. I'm not saying that at all, but we should stop and say, okay, my kid has been on this for a long time. It's not working. In this particular question, should I increase it? And the amount of people going, yeah, sure, it's natural. Yeah, nothing is if some unless you pull something straight from the ground, I don't think that it's natural, right? Even the most natural organic
Right.
thing is derived from somewhere, right? It's sort of artificially
Absolutely.
engineered.
Can I can I make one more comment about this question?
Go ahead.
Because there's a huge element missing here too, which is the question does not address parenting style at all.
Sure. Yeah.
Okay, now here's something you and I think can probably agree on that parenting style, interactions, all these different things, traumas that parents maybe haven't processed, all of these things can affect behavior.
Yes.
Okay. Now, notice that is conspicuously missing from the question. Maybe purposely, maybe not. But as I'm listening to these, I'm thinking there's so much information we don't have because this question, if you think about it, my friend, pathologizes the kid completely
Yeah.
in my mind.
Yep. And that is um not just with this group, but many groups that I'm in, it tends to be sort of the theme. Um,
Right.
because it's like, oh, my kid, my kid. But we also, as adults, need to take a step back and say, okay, and is there something I'm doing or not doing, right? Because that's that
Yes.
co-regulation thing. Our kids pick up on our nervous systems, and if we're dysregulated, of course. But that takes our own work to do, right? So,
It does. And you know what? Because again, I used to work with kids and because I've been fired from parents, I know how difficult it is to have those discussions. But I think they need to happen, especially when we're going to say your child is mentally ill, because that really is what we're saying here, right?
yeah,
This kid can't regulate. We got to give him a diagnosis. But this is a fantastic question, and I'm thinking all these questions. We'll get through them in like 2 seconds. Apparently not, because
yeah,
I have too much to say and too much to listen to. So
yeah.
very good question. I'm impressed.
And some of your answers sort of lead into some of my other questions. So I could ask you like 50 questions, but I'll turn it over to you.
Yep.
We'll go there. We'll sort of put a bookmark. And those of you
All right.
listening, if you have something to add or you have
Absolutely.
questions, we can certainly expand on this question. Is the word expand or is it expound, Eric?
I think we can do more. I think expound means we can say more. I think expand means we can just make the conversation bigger. But now we're getting into English, and I love words and language, so thank you for that. So, I totally went old school. I actually printed out my questions, which I'm sure nobody does anymore. And I got my question off Quora.
Okay.
If you ever go through Quora threads, it's just there's no particular group necessarily. It's just
Sure.
people asking mental health stuff. So here goes my question, Justin. Can I ask my therapist if he would date me if I wasn't his client? I want to know if he likes my appearance. Welcome to
There's
the dark side, my friend.
There's so much packed into that question. I don't
Yeah.
even know where to start. Like, can you read that one to me again? There's so much in
You
there.
know what? I figured I might have to because after I read it again, I'm like, wow. So can I ask my therapist if he would date me if I wasn't his client? I want to know if he likes my appearance.
So this is a so this let's just make it clear for me and our viewers. So this is a person who's actively seeing a therapist who is having these thoughts.
Presumably, right?
That's sort of that's sort of how I'm interpreting it. That this client is currently seeing their therapist, and they want to ask them a hypothetical. If I wasn't your client, so let's pretend I mean, I could be a gay male too. Let's just pretend I'm your client for a second, Eric. You're
Sure,
saying I'm the
sure.
client, you're the therapist, and
Right.
we're in a session, and I go, Eric, I've been wondering if this is okay. I'm just gonna do it. Would you date me if I wasn't your client? That's sort of the scenario you're asking, correct?
Correct. You got it. Yes.
Yeah. So so my response to that is do it. Um, if you are a client and you have that question, yeah, ask your therapist. Just as I did. Eric, we've been working together. It's all about how you approach it, right? So, Eric, we've been
Right.
working together for a while. This is gonna maybe be weird, but I'm just gonna do it because it's been on my mind. And I can't sleep, and I'm wondering hypothetically, um, like if we weren't, if you weren't my therapist, like would you ever date me? Like if I asked you out, like could we go on a date? And the reason I say go ahead and ask that is because you're the client. You can ask whatever the hell you want. Um,
Mhm.
it is the therapist's responsibility to how the therapist responds to that is
Right.
is really key. Because of course, if the therapist engages in, I mean, like, what is the number one rule? I mean, there is so much stuff in ethics and all my ethics courses. The only thing I really have taken out of any of my ethics courses or trainings is don't have sex with your client. And that's where my mind goes with
Yeah.
this.
Yeah. Uh, that's really not a good thing to do. And yeah, rule of thumb, never have sex with your clients.
Right.
Uh, here's the interesting thing though about this that for me brings it to a whole other level. I want to know if he likes my appearance.
Sure.
Now, my first thought with that is, yeah, we want validation here. We're maybe not getting validation in other areas.
Hmm.
And as I was going to kind of challenge you a little bit, but then I had another thought, which is there's sort of a I get this because we get close to our therapists. We do. Okay. Where I think this gets really complicated is if you're dealing with somebody that has, say, BPD pathology, this can be a real landmine because if you say, yes, I think I would find you attractive, there's a possibility they're going to cling to that, and
Yeah.
that can be used against you very effectively.
Yeah.
Now, is that going to happen every time? No, it's not. But I think, again, there has to be profound caution in this.
And this is where documentation, as much as we all hate that D word,
Yes.
that
Yes.
that is where that is key. So, as somebody who's newer in private practice, I'm learning that documentation saves. I mean, it covers your ass
It
in
does.
more than one
Right.
way. So this is where documentation is key. How you approached it. What did you say? How did you follow up? I think there's a lot there. I think it's good to engage in it. I mean, this is not all therapists are the same, but for me, I would totally engage in that and say, let's be very clear. Um, you know, we have to we have to remain professional here. This is a working relationship, and I'm wondering where that question is coming from, right?
Right. And you
And
just nailed
so
it. Right.
it's sort of being, if you've ever watched politicians, it's deflecting a little bit, but it's asking the more important thing that I think is in that question is where is it coming from? What is the root, as you sort of alluded to? Why does that client feel the need? And I think there's a lot of good work there that could happen. And so how the therapist navigates that, um, I think is key.
I think you're right. And as I'm listening, boy, do I like this background too. Talk about ADHD. I just, it is literally like you're stuck in a forested nightmare here, which is just wonderful. So again, thank you for endorsing that. I think the other element too is how long you've known the person. So, for example, if I've known this person for 6 months, I think as a therapist, and every client's different, but generally, I think I could deal with this question a lot better than if this is like session number two, where I maybe don't have a great feel for the client and I might be thinking, oh crap, what do I say? So I think that can make a difference. Uh, but I think also in any case, this is a very difficult question to answer or address, but it's going to happen. This is going to come up for the newbies out there. You're going to get submarined on some idle Tuesday, and you're going to be like, "Where did that come from?" Well, yeah,
The wrong answer, the wrong response to that
tell us.
would be, I think I'd probably be able to answer that question better with a drink. You want to go get one after a session? That would be absolutely 100%. Your board is going to come down on you. But
Yeah,
let's be real, Eric. We've worked with clients. I mean, while I mostly work with teens and kids 9 and up, I mean, I do have some adults. And let's be honest. I mean, when you work with people for a long time, you get to know them in different ways, and you get to hear some of these deep, dark things. And it is
that's true.
natural. Here's the Freudian thing. It is natural because I believe at our core, and this is a whole nother debate, but I believe at our core that we, like Freud said, are driven by sex and aggression. And
Mm.
and so it is, I think, a natural response as a human to feel a type of way about another person, regardless of whether you're a therapist or not. It's what you do with that feeling. And as Freud would say, if you cannot control that, it's time to move on.
And what I like about you saying, yeah, the Freud episode, we'll shoot that one in like October because I have some things to say about that.
Around
But
Halloween.
the thing, yeah, I know, wouldn't that be perfect? October 31st episode. Here's what I like about what you're saying. You're not saying run away from this, which
Yeah.
I think is the wrong thing to do on any level. Okay. So while you're saying don't follow it up with let's go have a drink, also don't say I'm not comfortable answering that. Do not do that because that is going to invite more doubt to your client. It's going to lead to lack of connection. And even on that level, this is still a very difficult thing to address. But do not lie. Do not lie about it
Yeah,
because it will
100%.
come back to bite you. Yeah.
Because if you avoid it now, right? If you avoid it now, what about the next client or the
Yes.
next client or the next
Correct.
client? This is a good opportunity for clinicians, new and seasoned, to grow and to learn how to deal and work with those types of clients. I also think being honest and true to who you are, and I believe in being very authentic with your clients. And so another way to approach it might be to say, you know, I can't really even answer that question because you are my clients and I am the therapist.
Mhm.
And that question is just beyond any of either of our boundaries. And so, even in a hypothetical situation, it would not be fair to me to answer that one way or another. I think that that
Yeah.
I think that that maybe will cause some additional questions or doubt by the client. But I also think it's drawing a boundary of, without saying, "How dare you be so inappropriate and ask me that kind of question?" I think it's a way to say, um, like, this is our role, and for me to even have that hypothetical is impossible because we're already in this situation, right? And so trying to
Right.
make that clear
Right.
to your client, boundaries are a great thing. Boundaries are a great thing, and this is that transference, countertransference thing, right? And
Of
how
course.
do you
Yeah.
work? How do
Right.
you work with that?
Uh, yeah. This is really fun. Thank you.
Yeah, you ready for your next
Okay.
question?
I think what was that?
Are you ready for your next question, or?
I am ready for the next question. Fire away.
So this one might push some buttons, and so we'll try to
All right.
clarify any what is it, misnomers. I'm trying to use like 50-cent
Just
words
over.
today.
Yes. 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 Yes.
Um, so this one came from a different group.
All right.
Um, just making a note here because I have like 50 questions here, but I want to make sure we have time to ask the good ones. They're all
You
good,
know
but
what? We might get through the 50 by the end of the year. Let's give ourselves, like 4 months. Okay.
all right. So this person was early 20s. I'm talking like 21, 22-ish. And they went on to their Facebook group that they're part of, because you get such accurate information there, and said,
Right.
and said, I've talked with a lot of friends, and I even took a lot of assessments online. I think I have ADHD. Where can I go for an ADHD specific assessment? What do you think about those types of questions?
So I'm cringing internally, and this may cause some friction tonight, but I feel more ready for it. A couple things are happening here. Number one, don't ever self-diagnose. Just don't ever self-diagnose. Okay. Uh, to me, that's a path called danger. That's my first thought. My other thought is, do you really not know where to go? I guess to me that's sort of the disconnect here. With mental health so prominent, is it really that difficult to figure out where to go to get an evaluation? But let me even put that to the side. You're assuming you have ADHD when it could be a million other things. So let
Yeah.
me let me you see what I'm doing is I'm branching this out like an onion
Yep.
because this goes back to my other theory that we should not be giving the consumer this much power and information. We shouldn't be. It didn't used to be this way. I think you and I had talked about the fact, and I'm quoting Michael Yapko, paraphrasing, med companies didn't used to advertise to the consumer directly. That did not start happening until 1980. Now it's everywhere. To me, this is just the same thing happening where people read something and they think, oh my God, I have it. And so I'm not sure I've answered the question, but I think more than anything, I'm offended that we've allowed it to get this bad. So how is that for an answer?
So let me follow up on what you just said. Uh,
Please.
um, so you mentioned 1980, that this didn't start that advertising directly to the consumer didn't happen until around 1980. Do you know what happened in 1980, Eric?
Um,
Or the 80s in
Empire
general?
Strikes Back came out. It was a great year for movies.
I wasn't even born yet.
I know you weren't, which makes me even more sad.
As my father would
Uh,
say, I wasn't even a twinkle in his eye yet.
don't you love when parents say that stuff? So no, I'm going to play ignorant. I don't know what else happened in 1980.
So so prior to that, um, ADHD in the DSM, the Diagnostic Statistic Manual, the
Statistical manual. Yep,
yeah, the crappy book that I is just collecting dust in my office.
we have
Um,
one on my shelf too. Yeah.
uh, it was called hyperkinetic reaction of childhood. That's what it was called. And it wasn't until I mean, kind of in the 60s they were sort of playing around with this, but it wasn't until like the 80s that the it wasn't until the 80s, and I think that was when the DSM 3 or 4 came out.
Yep.
Um,
Yep. Yep.
when it was finally recognized as attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. So coincidentally, right? Okay,
Yeah.
now all of a sudden ADHD is a thing. Coincidentally, we stop sort of you know the pharmaceutical companies with the providers, and we're now directly marketing this to consumers. And let me go a
Right.
step further. Have you read the book ADHD Nation by Alan Schwartz?
No, but it's on my shelf. Embarrassingly enough, I have not read it.
I love the book for many reasons. Um, but I mean, I've read a lot of the statistics he gives. I've looked up myself, and there's a lot of validity to it. But the Ritalin and Adderall and those things
Adderall.
skyrocketed after ADHD came out. Pharmaceuticals started making those, started selling those, and it just started skyrocketing. And so
Yeah.
I'm not
Right.
saying that ADHD doesn't exist, but Alan Schwartz gives a statistic that says that 1 in 7 Americans are diagnosed with ADHD. If you go in the DSM-5, I'd have to look at the statistic very specifically, but 1 in 7, that is not statistically what the DSM says that is possible for true ADHD.
Wow. Wow.
So that means that people are being way overdiagnosed. And so let me back up a little bit. Um, with that question in particular, my mind goes to, where do I get an ADHD specific assessment? Why would you
Right.
want a specific assessment? What, like, sort of to your point, why not rule out everything? Which I'm biased. I spent a year in my master's training doing neuropsychological evaluations with a very
Sure.
trauma trained psychologist. Um, and man, when she would get those emails, she would say, "You know, I can give you some resources. I don't think I'm the psychologist for you." I mean, she was bold, she was brazen, and she would say that, "I don't think
Yeah.
I'm the psychologist for you." And she did that to somebody who wanted an ASD diagnosis. And that person was so offended that they went back to their group, and this psychologist went from 2 Google reviews to 15, and they were all 1 stars because they were
No.
so upset that she would say, and she said what you
Right.
said essentially, which was you know, and she put the, I'm paraphrasing, but she put this in a more professional way, but just said
No, that's fine.
it appears you've already self-diagnosed yourself, and so that's going to skew the data coming in here.
It's
You
a
will
great point.
answer the questions as if you've already had an ASD diagnosis, right? An ASD, autism spectrum disorder. Um, and so she said, you know, I don't know that I'm the correct clinician for you. So kudos for her to saying that. But the client read it as, how dare she? And
How
and
dare you?
and she's not ASD reaffirming and all of these things. And so she went back to her group, and they left her all these 1 star reviews and said some nonsense, and it was crazy. So you have to be able to rule everything out. You know, ADHD symptoms overlap with a lot of other things.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know,
They
so
they certainly do. and so I'm just kind of delighted now because, and again, I could pick this question apart 10 different ways, but let's compare this to a medical scenario. Okay. If you go to the doctor and say, I want this to be diabetes, not heart failure. Well, here's a time where if you have a reasonably competent doctor, they're going to say, no, I'm sorry, this is heart failure, but I
Yeah.
want it to be diabetes, but it's heart failure. But I want it now. Here's where our field is unique and where I'm really going to piss off everybody tonight. This is why mental health work has a lot of challenges in it, because everything is filtered through a lens, from what the client reports to what we perceive to what everybody around them. And so this will be a whole other episode we need to do too, but this is the limit of mental health in some ways.
Yeah.
See, in the biological world, you can't do that. If you've got a heart condition, you can't talk your way out of that one. But you can say to a clinician, I have Asperger's disorder or autism. And you can believe it because I can't disprove it the same way I can with a medically valid test, right?
Right. Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
That
Yeah.
So this is sort of just a quick aside for a future episode. Um, there is an article, an interview with this psychologist who basically said, who talks about that and why we changed in, I think it was the 70s or the 80s, why we changed. And when I say we, I mean the mental health field, the psychology field, specifically the APA. Don't cancel me, APA. Why they
Right, right,
changed
right.
the words from mental illness to disorder, because an
Right.
illness in the medical community, you can do an X-ray, you can do an MRI, you can do a CT, you can run labs, and you can say, "Yup, this is what you got." And so the medical field was really questioning the mental health world, saying, "Yo, you have depression? How do you test for that? Where's the MRI? Where's the brain scan?" And so it was really invalidating our field. And so there's this. So the psychologist goes on to say, so we sort of panicked, and then we said everything is a disorder, right? And here's the criteria you need to meet, which is so. I'm not even going to finish that sentence. That is a future discussion to have.
Um, but we're both provoked here, which is really good. And that's what I like about this. So I know because we only have so much time. I think I'm good for that question. You ready for your next one?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right. This you're gonna have to unpack this one too, but you're gonna like it. So, Justin, I've started secretly filming my therapy Skype sessions. I watch them back during the week and I catch things I wouldn't have seen. My therapist has noticed that I'm processing quicker or progressing quicker. I feel so much more connected to him. Is this a bad thing?
Um,
Yeah,
uh, I don't even. I don't even know where to start with that one. I'm not.
that's why I picked it. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I'm not usually one, as you yourself and probably our viewers can tell. I'm not really one that's at a loss for words very often. um,
No.
but this one stumps me a little bit. I mean, you know, recording in the office, recording in sessions can happen, right? With with the proper sort of paperwork and releases and things like that. And so, if the client is doing that, man, that by itself, and maybe that's not where you were going with that question, but that by itself, the recording, that makes me all kinds of like, I don't like that, because the therapy session, yes, is supposed to be the therapy office or the telehealth. It's supposed to be a safe place for the client, right?
Right. Right.
But at the same time, it needs to be a safe place for the therapist. If I don't feel safe, I can't provide quality treatment or care or interventions to my clients.
Right.
And so if there's these recordings happening and I don't know about it, ooh, how can I be my authentic self?
And think about this. Any number of clients could record these and share them anywhere they wanted to.
Sure.
And I and knowing how tough the boards are on people, I bet the boards would come down on the therapist for not having explicitly stated in their intake packet you are not to record these sessions.
Yep.
So to me, that's the biggest scare factor there
Yep.
is I'm going to lose my license for something I don't even know about that I probably didn't think I had to cover that it turns out I should have covered because I'm reading this and I have an even stronger reaction, which is this is kind of appalling to me. But let me jump back, Justin, because I don't know this person's diagnosis, their history, their background. I don't know what their level of cognizance is regarding this stuff. So you gotta look at those things too. But at face value, yeah, this is terrifying.
Yeah, and it sort of gives some vibes of your one of your previous questions, about the client sort of having these thoughts about the therapist and
Right,
uh,
right.
does he like me and that kind of thing. So this, so what is this client doing with these videos? Is it just voice recording? Is it video recording? Are they sort of like diagnostically creepily watching the therapist and like I mean that is pathological and something that would need to be you know explored. I think that in grad school when I actually it wasn't even in grad school, it was in my undergrad when I was doing sort of my alcohol and drug courses. We sat and in these offices and we role played and we recorded them and then we got to watch them back and I do think
Right.
that there is a lot of um there are a lot of benefits to that. You get to see how you're interacting or like you notice like, oh, you were playing with your hands the whole time. How did the client receive that? So
Yeah,
but
absolutely.
if everybody isn't aware of that
Well,
kind of stuff.
well, yeah, because what you're talking about is done by agreement. We have to agree to do this. So, it's not just done randomly. The other thing I want to point out here, because I think this is relevant, where the person says, my therapist has noticed that I'm progressing quicker. Just that comment by itself in context, what do you think about that? My
My
therapist
therapist.
thinks I'm progressing quicker.
um yeah, I don't know. My mind kind of goes blank on that. Where does your mind go?
I, well, it goes to this. This is almost like a fantasy. Like I'm doing something that's the right thing to do, but it's done in such a manipulative way
Yeah.
that I'll just say it. This is what reeks to me of personality disorder type things
Yep.
because it's very coercive, it's very manipulative, it's very out of the presence of the therapist, but now the client is evaluating themselves. Again, if we're taking this at face value, and I
Yep.
could have this totally wrong, and this may have nothing to do with personality functioning, but at face value, that's what I'm picking up here.
Yeah, which is concerning. I mean, and this puts the
Yeah,
therapist right in a situation they probably don't even know about, right?
right.
This
I just
this
love it. Yeah.
well, it makes me think about it makes me think about one of my best friends. He was dating this girl for a while, and they've been broken up for many years. She has a very, very evident personality disorder, and
Right.
she all these years later, she still randomly contacts him, and he was sending me some screenshots of her lengthy messages that were unprovoked, and she's talking about her therapist and how she
Mhm.
she thinks he's sexy and he's so attractive and she knows that he's divorced and she's just gonna go for it and I know that he can't have a relationship with me for at least the next 2 years but I'm just gonna if
Mhm.
I keep it quiet and he keeps it quiet she said some things like you know, you can't, love has no bounds, or something like that. And
Wow.
very, very, very pathological. And
Yeah.
I don't
Yeah.
know, on the therapist side, I don't know if they're aware, if they've engaged in this also, but it happens more often than not. And so
Absolutely.
this question gives me those vibes also. And um yeah, it's concerning. And so for new clinicians, this stuff
Ye-
exists, and I
Yeah.
don't want you to be afraid of it. But I want you, I encourage you to like think of and reflect. How would I react to this? How would I respond to this client? Um, you know,
I'm actually thinking for my group supervision on Monday, I might bring that one in because they've all done telehealth. Some of them still do telehealth because as much as Quora and Reddit and all these things have things that are just not worth reading, this is important, even whether it's true or not, Justin. This has such an importance to it because I think a lot of young clinicians get into this and they're so confident in what they know, and then it's those days where you just get submarined, right? Where you just didn't see it coming. And I want to know the day two story. If this is true, and the disclosure is made to the therapist, I want to know how this therapist reacted. I would love to have that therapist come on this show and tell us how they reacted when that client says, "Hey, I've been filming you for like 8 sessions. I think I'm doing better." Wouldn't that be a remarkable discussion to have?
yeah, yeah, it would be interesting. That makes my
It
mind
would
go in
be.
like a million different ways. Um,
I know. I know.
oh, okay. So I've got one more question for you, I think.
Yeah, that's probably all we have time for tonight. But I am ready. After that, I can take anything.
So this is something I found on Reddit. And it wasn't
Yes.
necessarily, this is more of a, maybe like a sort of a philosophical, biological, psychological question. And it
Mm,
had hundreds and hundreds and I mean, we're probably talking maybe close to 1,000 responses. And I was asked a similar question, I think in like a multicultural course in my doctoral program. But I want to pose a question to you, um, which is, Eric, do you think that people are born bad or inherently terrible beings?
mm.
Or do you think, I think the word was evil, really, which is sort of a strong
Okay.
word. Do you think people are born
Right.
evil? Or do you think that
Wow.
people are born all good and the world just sort of warps us? Because I have a very strong opinion on this.
Okay. Well, let me go ahead and answer it. Uh, but we have to break down the terminology as always because evil is a really big term.
Right.
Okay. And that's not me trying to back out of it. I just we have to decide what that is. But to go with the typical definition, do I believe some people are born without the capacity for empathy? Yes, I do. I absolutely do. Okay. But do I believe that people intentionally want to be evil most of the time? I no, I don't. I really don't believe people want to be intentionally evil. But it happens, and maybe society has a huge role in that. I remember the Columbine shooting. I think you were not born yet for that, but all
Oh, come
these
on. That was
questions
in
kept
'99
getting
or
asked. Was it
2000. I was totally born. I was born in '91.
okay? All right, so you were born, but you were still just a kid. I remember that was the first school shooting where I felt like it really got political and nature versus nurture,
Sure.
and it was the violent video games and the fact they watched all the movies, and then we came to find out they felt isolated, which that's been challenged too. I mean, everybody's got their theory. uh I think most people, I'm going to say this, most people, if they are given compassion and love, and I have a quote on my website, and the last part of it is, I think it goes, "Involve me and I'll understand." I wish I could quote the whole thing, even though it's on my website. But it's this idea that if I'm part of something, I'm probably going to be okay. And
Sure.
because I'm all about the underdog, maybe that's driving some of this. But I think if people feel wanted and connected to things, for the most part, they're going to be okay. I really do. Now, is that goodness necessarily? I know that's a good thing, but that's what I truly believe. And if you're asking me, do I think some people are beyond help under the right circumstances? Yeah, possibly. Antisocial personality disorder. The research says there is nothing we can do for these people. I'm not saying that myself, but that is what the research concludes every time. So, how is that for a big, long, convoluted response?
Yeah, I'm sort of feeling like I'm sort of feeling like there's more there, and you're just trying to be nice. Um,
Possibly. Okay, you know what? I'll take that, but I want to hear what you have to say.
well, there's a Yale. Yale University did a research. Published some research, and they showed that that there's some evidence that babies are born. Uh, they have this innate goodness about them,
Okay.
right? Um, and there's various different factors that influence that. Uh, but I am of the opinion that humans are born pretty terrible. Period.
Mm.
Um, and I draw that from sort of, well, if you look at nature versus nurture, what comes first? Nature does, right?
Right.
I mean,
Right. Right.
nature is always the first thing. We are born, and that is nature. That is the circle of life. And Freud, I'm gonna go back to my man Freud for a little while, but
That's twice tonight, Justin.
this sex and aggression, right? And when I say sex, I don't necessarily just mean like the action that having that
I get it.
sex. That we'll get into
Yeah.
that at another time. But
Absolutely. Yeah.
at our core, we are aggressive beings in the sense that we want what we want and we need what we need, right? We need to eat, we need to drink, we need to satisfy our desires, and and children are not that different, right? If you take away parenting, if you take away the nurture, you just put that aside for a second. What do children want? They want what they want, and I mean, I just picked up my toddlers earlier, and what was the first thing daycare tells me? Oh, my son, who's about 15 months older than my daughter, he punched her in the face and made her bleed. Why? Because she had a toy that he really wanted. That is nature. He wanted what he wanted, and he was going to do what he needed to do to get what he wants, right?
Right.
Will he forever be doing that? I hope not. If parenting and all that stuff comes into play, no, he won't do that. But at our core, I think we are aggressive beings, and I think that's why we see in this world, you know, trafficking and murders and so on, neglect and abuse and so on and so forth, because nature is the dominant thing, dominant concept, and too many children grow up to be adults that never get the nurture part. So nurture, what I'm saying is nurture is an extremely important thing, but we are not born with that. We are born naturally, and I think we are born naturally aggressive human beings.
So, yeah, man, I don't even have enough time to unpack that, but let me say this since you've insinuated that I've been holding back a little bit. So I am a fan of Joe Rogan's show. I don't necessarily like everything he says. I think he says some really stupid stuff sometimes. But he had you know who Eric Weinstein is?
Yeah. Yes.
He's I think he's an evolutionary biologist. Don't quote me on that. But he said whenever he hears people say things like when it came to the Holocaust, I could never do that. He said that's the wrong answer because the Nazi is within us. And I think about that sometimes when it comes to like groupthink. There's a really famous video where a guy is like looking at these different straws, the different lengths, and he gets it right every time. Then they bring in the other people. They all say the shortest one's the longest, and then he agrees with them because he wants to be part of the group. And so I think that correlates to what you're saying, which is we kind of project a righteousness at times, but it does not take much. And to pick on just to pick on Hitler for a second, how many of those people in that regime possibly were raised with compassion, with empathy, with all of these different qualities, and they still did horrendous stuff?
Right.
So I think that's how I take your point. Um, we are not as evolved as we think, and I think that's the thing people don't want to hear. We're not.
Right.
So there, I said the most controversial thing I've said so far. I hope you're happy.
Well, I appreciate that, and I think we aren't evolved as people think, and we try to act like we are, and we have all
Sure.
these other things, technology and whatnot, that are way beyond our capacity that we're
Right.
messing with. This is a whole nother conversation, but we're messing with
Absolutely.
these things, and we don't even understand human beings. We
Right.
don't even,
Right.
psychology is a very young science. It has not been around that long. And there
True.
are many, many, many things that we do not understand. And I think that, that might help us to understand this question, or where even the person that asked this question, right? Um, where does the, words are hard right now, but I think that this is a
No.
very philosophical and also psychological question, that I don't know that there's any one right answer, but I think it's a good question
Right.
to pose and for our viewers
I
to
do too.
answer, because we
Yeah,
see this question come up in different ways today, even in 2023.
we certainly do. And I think maybe to kind of step outside that question, we ask this question: is it worth it to try to get people to be as good as they possibly can be? And I say yes, it is worth the effort to get people to be as good as they can be,
Sure.
as caring and as compassionate as they can be. In a way, that's what we do in our jobs. I mean, on some level, we're trying to increase people's capacity of self, of goodness. But it's a great question, and it really made me think tonight because I've done some bad stuff in my life, Justin. I've done some things that I am so utterly ashamed of that it's painful to this day,
Sure.
right? And
Same.
I think it is important to remember we're capable of things that we disassociate ourselves with because we haven't been in those conditions before.
Right.
And do not tell me you're not capable of great evil, because you are. But the flip side is you're capable of amazingly good things too. and,
Right.
and that's again what we want to bring out in people, is the amazingness of your compassion and your givingness. Um, but it made me think tonight. Thank you. That really took me off in a different direction.
Well, I love your optimism there. I'm not as optimistic as you are, about
Sure.
people and things like that. But I appreciate your optimism. That sort of sounded a little like, maybe motivational interviewing, which I'm not a fan of.
A
But
little bit.
but but yes, this has been a sort of a different episode than last week's, when we talked about trauma focused CBT.
Yes.
But
Right.
very thought provoking, and so I also appreciate that. And like I said,
Me
and
too.
as you said last week, comments, feedback is appreciated. I'm sure this will stir some things up for people, and we'd be more than happy to answer those questions, or to sort of dive into some of those a little bit more.
And I was thinking too, Justin, and I know that people are always afraid to come on and do stuff like this because I think they're afraid to be made fun of. Or I want to make a promise to any viewer or listener that wants to come on and talk with us. You will not be made to feel stupid. You will not be made to feel dumb. We want to hear you because, like I said, I know there's a lot I don't know, and that every point I make has a strong argument against it. And I would love to hear the argument against even what I'm saying.
Yep.
Because somebody out there is thinking, I would never do anything evil. Okay, let's come on, tell me about that. What do you know that I don't?
Right.
So I just want to reinforce that we're open to anybody.
Yeah. And we don't know what we don't know. And also, somebody very wise told me,
Right.
for everything that I do know, there's so much more that I don't know.
And that's what makes the beauty of being a lifelong learner so exciting, because we're not afraid to say we're wrong.
Right.
And again, I don't think you get that enough anymore anywhere, but let's be two people that do offer that. Yeah. Yeah. Well, you have to do the outro tonight. It's live, but you got to say goodbye to everybody.
Yeah. Well, thank you all for listening. We very much appreciate it. Thank you for having us. If you stuck in there for the entire duration of this show, we appreciate you. We look forward. I look forward to many more conversations, many more discussions. I'm really waiting for that big debate where you and I really disagree, because that's going to be fun. And if you
Yes, sir.
have any thoughts, viewers, if you have thoughts, I've said it a million times. I'll say it 1,000,001. Drop in the comment section. Subscribe on YouTube to the Darkside of Therapy. We want to hear from you. We do this really to engage not just new clinicians, but anybody that might find some worth to this. So thank you again for listening tonight, and we will be back soon to have more awesome conversations.
It was awesome. See you later.